I still remember the first time I saw Jenny on the bustling campus of our university. The autumn air was crisp, and golden leaves danced around us as I clutched my books, nervously making my way to class. There was something about her, an effortless grace, a quiet intensity in her eyes, that captivated me instantly. For years, I nurtured a silent hope that one day she might notice the earnest devotion I offered. Even as I was learning about calculus and literature, my heart was teaching me lessons of its own. I was young, naive perhaps, but what I felt was as real as the chill in the early mornings. Despite my heartfelt admiration, Jenny's heart had always strayed toward another. Even in those early days, whispers among our circle hinted at a deep connection between her and Johnson, a charismatic fellow student with a mischievous smile and an undeniable spark. I could sense it, even if I couldn't fully understand it at the time. Jenny and Johnson shared secrets in the library's quiet corners and laughter over cups of coffee after classes. Their bond was palpable, and I often felt like an outsider peering into a world where I did not belong. Life, however, has a way of weaving unexpected tales. As our university years passed, I found myself slowly drifting into Jenny's orbit. Perhaps it was fate or the slow transformation of youthful dreams into adult realities. One evening, when a storm raged outside and the campus seemed to shudder with the wind, Jenny reached out. The invitation was quiet, almost tentative, a coffee meetup in the campus cafe. I arrived early, the scent of roasted beans and damp rain mingling in the air, and sat waiting with a mixture of hope and apprehension. When she finally appeared, radiant under the soft glow of the cafe lights, I felt that long-suppressed hope ignite once more. That in the weeks and months that followed, we became inseparable. Jenny and I built a life based on trust, shared dreams, and the comfort of familiarity. We married a few years later, a celebration of new beginnings, of hearts united after years of unspoken longing. I often thought back to my college days and wondered how it had come to pass that the girl who once seemed unreachable was now my wife. Perhaps it was the steady strength of commitment that slowly bridged the gap between us, even if her heart once leaned toward another. Yet, amid our seemingly contented life, a subtle undercurrent of unease began to stir within me. There were moments, fleeting, almost imperceptible, when I sensed that Jenny's thoughts might stray beyond our shared home and daily routines. I chalked these moments up to the ebb and flow of life, the natural fluctuation of desires and dreams. After all, no long-term relationship is immune to moments of quiet uncertainty. Still, in the back of my mind, a voice whispered that something deeper might be at work. That I recall one particular autumn evening, 10 years into our marriage, when I felt a chill not born of the seasonal wind. It was after a small gathering of close friends at our home, a celebration of life, love, and the simple joy of togetherness. Jenny had mingled effortlessly with our guests, her laughter echoing softly, but her eyes occasionally wandered as if searching for something beyond our circle. I noticed that she seemed unusually distant, her smiles a little too forced when she returned my gaze. I dismissed it at the time, attributing it to the stress of everyday life and the unspoken burdens that accumulate in any long marriage. Unbeknownst to me, a transformation had been quietly unfolding in her heart. The very person I once thought of as my soulmate was now beginning to see the allure of a different kind of connection, one that had its roots in our shared past. Johnson, the friend who had once been merely a shadow in the corners of our college memories, had reappeared in her life, not as a fleeting acquaintance, but as someone whose presence stirred a dormant longing deep within her. Their interactions, always subtle and cloaked in the guise of casual friendship, had begun to take on a significance that neither of us fully acknowledged. In our eyes, it was simply the natural ebb and flow of friendships that have spanned years. In reality, it was the slow rekindling of a passion that had never truly extinguished. That I was, by all accounts, a good husband, attentive, hardworking, and deeply in love with Jenny. Yet, I must admit that I had grown complacent over the years. The passions of youth had settled into a quiet routine, and I became increasingly engrossed in my career and personal interests. On that fateful night, as I eagerly awaited the climax of a long-awaited basketball game, my one indulgence in the midst of life's responsibilities, I failed to sense the silent rebellion unfolding in my own home. While I cheered for my team on the television, somewhere in the depths of our home, Jenny and Johnson lingered together after the party. I was oblivious to the clandestine whispers and the fleeting touches that would soon culminate in an act of betrayal so profound that its repercussions would shatter the fragile equilibrium of my world. It wasn't until much later that I would come to understand that love, in its many forms, can be as unpredictable as it is unforgiving. As I sit here now, reflecting on those long-ago days and the fateful moments that followed, I am filled with a sorrow that words struggle to capture. The seeds of doubt were planted years ago, nurtured by the gentle rain of time and the unspoken desires that lurk beneath the surface of even the most stable relationships. I did not see the storm coming, not until it had already taken hold, leaving me to pick up the shattered remnants of a once-cherished dream. This is the beginning of my story, a story of love and betrayal, of missed signs and unheeded warnings. I was blind to the truth, caught in the comfortable delusions of routine and commitment. Little did I know that the passionate whispers of a past long buried would rise to claim what I had thought was forever. And so, the stage was set for a reckoning. A moment when the full weight of truth would come crashing down, altering the course of my life forever as the embers of that autumn evening faded into a distant memory. I remained unaware of the true cost of my complacency. The journey ahead would force me to confront not only the betrayal of the one I loved, but also the shortcomings within myself. In the coming parts of this tale, I will recount how the subtle signs transformed into undeniable proof, how the cozy illusions of marital bliss crumbled under the weight of reality, and how, in the end, I was left to pick up the pieces of a broken heart. For now, I leave you with the haunting echoes of that first chapter, a chapter that began with the innocent hope of university days and ended with the ominous silence of a love quietly dying. The seeds of betrayal had been sown, and the harvest was yet to come. In the months following that fateful autumn evening, life continued in its steady, predictable rhythm, or so I believed. The days bled into one another, marked by the routine of work, family dinners, and the occasional weekend outing. But beneath the veneer of normality, an undercurrent of tension began to weave its way through my thoughts, hinting at changes I was too distracted to notice. I had been consumed by my career and the small joys that anchored me, like following the local basketball team, a pastime that had always given me solace. I never imagined that my passion for the game would come to symbolize the very distraction that would blind me to the slow disintegration of our marriage. That night, the evening of the small gathering at our home, still haunts me. I had been looking forward to the long-anticipated final of the basketball match. It was more than just a game to me. It was an event that allowed me to lose myself in something I enjoyed without the pressures and responsibilities of everyday life. While I cheered, my attention was firmly fixed on the screen, oblivious to the subtle shifts occurring in the room where Jenny and Johnson lingered together to tea first. I recalled nothing out of the ordinary, just the comforting murmur of friendly chatter and clinking glasses. But as the night wore on, I began to notice moments that didn't quite fit with our usual, light-hearted gatherings. Jenny, normally effervescent and engaged with our guests, appeared more withdrawn and thoughtful, her eyes frequently darting toward the doorway as if expecting someone. I told myself it was nothing, a simple case of distraction or the residual fatigue of daily life. Meanwhile, Johnson, who had always been a charismatic figure in our circle, seemed to exude a warmth and familiarity that bordered on intimacy when he spoke with Jenny. Their conversation at first was hushed and casual. A shared memory here, a gentle laugh there. But soon I began to sense an unspoken language passing between them. Their body language was subtle yet undeniable. A lingering touch on the arm, an almost imperceptible lean-in as they exchanged confidences. I tried to dismiss these signals as remnants of college camaraderie, remnants of friendships forged long ago. I had no inkling then of the betrayal that was silently taking shape. As the evening progressed, the party began to wind down. Guests departed with friendly goodbyes, leaving behind an eerie silence that seemed to echo with secrets unsaid. Jenny excused herself early, citing an early start the next day. I, engrossed in the final minutes of the game, barely registered her departure. Johnson stayed a little longer, ostensibly to help tidy up, a gesture that, in hindsight, now appears tainted with ulterior motives. In the following days, the distance between Jenny and me grew in ways I struggled to understand. Her once spontaneous laughter was replaced with measured responses, and our conversations, once a comfortable exchange of thoughts and dreams, turned curt and perfunctory. I began to question if I was losing her, piece by piece, without fully grasping how the transformation had taken place. At night, I would lie awake, haunted by fleeting images of that party. The way her eyes shone in the dim light, the soft murmur of Johnson's voice, the way the space between them seemed to contract into an intimacy I had never known. Then came the 3-month silence that would forever alter the course of my life. It was as if the spark of betrayal had ignited a slow-burning fuse in Jenny's heart, one that I failed to detect until it was too late. I was wrapped up in the comfort of my routines, still clinging to the hope that maybe these were just phases, moments of distraction that could be mended with time and effort. I trusted in the stability of our long-standing relationship, convinced that the love that had seen us through our early years would weather any storm. The day Jenny sat me down to talk was both unexpected and painfully inevitable. We were in our living room, the place where so many memories had been etched into the very fabric of our shared life. The air was thick with tension. Jenny's eyes, usually so full of warmth, were distant and resolute. She began by recounting the events of that evening at the party, her voice trembling just enough to betray a hidden sorrow. She spoke of feeling an emptiness, a void that, she confessed, had been growing for years, and of rediscovering emotions that she once thought were long buried. It was then she mentioned Johnson, not as a friend, but as someone who had, over time, awakened a passion in her that I had never been able to kindle. The words hit me like a physical blow. I listened, numb, as she explained how she had tried to deny these feelings, how she had hoped to recapture the spark of excitement that had once lit her up. Instead, the slow, organic transformation of her emotions had led her to seek solace in the arms of the one person who had always been there, a friend I had trusted implicitly. Jenny spoke of moments that were seemingly insignificant at the time, but had accumulated into an avalanche of betrayal. Secret meetings, whispered conversations, and stolen glances that had morphed into something undeniable. She told me that the night of the party had been the final tipping point, a moment when the unresolved tension finally spilled over. In that devastating confession, I felt a crushing mix of disbelief, despair, and a profound emptiness. I recalled every missed opportunity to address the growing distance between us, every moment when I had chosen the comforting distraction of a basketball game over the silent pleas for connection from my wife. I was confronted with the stark realization that my own preoccupations had blinded me to the gradual erosion of our love. The comfort of routine, the warmth of familiar distractions, had turned into a prison of neglect, a neglect that had allowed betrayal to take root in our home. In the aftermath of that conversation, the days blurred into a haze of sorrow and regret. I found myself wandering through our once happy home, each room echoing with memories that now felt tainted by loss. The images of our early years together, of laughter shared beneath the golden hues of autumn, seemed distant, as if they belonged to another lifetime. I was left questioning where I had gone wrong and why I had been so oblivious to the signs. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. It was a betrayal of trust, of shared dreams, and of the sanctity of our most private moments. As I sit here now, grappling with the reality of our fractured lives, I am overwhelmed by a sense of despair. The realization that I had been so consumed by my own world, that my distractions had cost me the love of my life, brings with it an aching loneliness. It is a loneliness that seeps into every corner of my existence, a constant reminder of the price I paid for not being present when it mattered most. In the coming days, as the finality of our decision loomed, I began to search for answers in places I never thought to look. I wondered if there had been a chance to mend what was broken, or if the slow unraveling of our connection was inevitable. The ghost of that basketball game, the echoes of the party, and the whispered confessions all became interwoven into a tapestry of regret that I now carry with me. This part of my story, the part where betrayal stepped into our home and stole away the life I once knew, is a painful reminder that love can be as fragile as it is powerful. It is a cautionary tale of how the most precious relationships can crumble when one is not careful to nurture them. and how the distractions we so often indulge in can blind us to the quiet warnings of a dying connection. In the days that followed Jenny's confession, the world I knew unraveled before my eyes. Each morning, I woke to a heavy silence that pressed down on the house like a storm cloud. The familiar comfort of our home was now tainted with memories that stung with betrayal. I felt as though I were living in a distorted reflection of my former life. A life where every shadow whispered of secrets and every echo reminded me of love lost. The initial shock gave way to a relentless self-recrimination. I replayed every moment, every conversation, searching for the signs that I had so carelessly ignored. I remembered the way Jenny's eyes would occasionally drift away during our shared dinners, and the fleeting glances she'd steal at Johnson during family gatherings. I had dismissed them as quirks of a long-term relationship, never suspecting that they were breadcrumbs leading to an abyss of deception. Now, each recollection was a painful reminder of my complacency. In my quest for understanding, I turned inward. I questioned how my devotion, once as steadfast as an anchor, had slowly morphed into a series of distractions. Basketball games, long work hours, even my well-meaning attempts to pursue hobbies had become excuses. They were shields against the vulnerability of truly engaging with Jenny, of listening when she spoke in soft, tentative tones. The realization that I had constructed my own fortress of detachment was as crushing as the betrayal itself. That I began to isolate myself in the dim light of late evenings, sitting alone in our living room long after Jenny had retreated to a bedroom that no longer felt like a shared sanctuary. I would sit there, staring at the faded photographs of happier times, trying to summon the warmth that once defined our relationship. Instead, I was met with an emptiness so profound that it echoed in the silence around me. I found solace only in the routine motions of cleaning up, eating dinner mechanically, and scrolling endlessly through old messages in a desperate attempt to find an explanation. Amidst this inner turmoil, I couldn't help but wonder about Johnson. How could someone I had always considered a loyal friend be so intertwined with Jenny's secret desires? I recalled our many shared moments of laughter, the plans we made as comrades in a seemingly unbreakable bond. It was inconceivable that he, too, had harbored feelings that defied the boundaries of friendship. My mind swirled with questions. Had he been silently savoring every moment of our mutual closeness? Did he ever consider that the connection he fostered with Jenny could become something far more dangerous than a mere friendship? Late one night, while the house was shrouded in darkness and the only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the clock, I made a decision. I needed answers not just for myself, but to understand how everything had spiraled so irreversibly out of control. With trembling hands, I searched through our shared digital history, old emails, messages, and even social media posts, in hopes of uncovering hints of this clandestine bond. Every conversation, every laugh shared between Jenny and Johnson, was now tainted by the knowledge of what lay beneath. I traced back to the early days of our acquaintance, noticing subtle shifts in tone and timing that, at the time, I had dismissed as harmless banter. And that lonely vigil, I came across messages that hinted at a past unfulfilled, a secret longing that had simmered beneath polite smiles and friendly greetings. The more I read, the more I felt the raw sting of betrayal, not just from Jenny's actions but also from the shared history I had believed to be unbreakable. I realized that the foundations of our relationship had been built on assumptions and half-truths that I had never dared to question. The trust one had placed in both of them now seemed like a fragile veneer, shattered by the relentless tide of reality. Every discovery deepened my despair, and yet, amid the overwhelming sorrow, I found an unexpected clarity. The painful introspection forced me to confront the uncomfortable truth. I had been both a victim and an unwitting accomplice in the slow decay of our bond. I had allowed my own distractions to mask the silent cries for attention that Jenny had long tried to voice. And in doing so, I had unwittingly given room for someone else to fill that void. A void I had so carelessly neglected. As the days turned into weeks, I attempted to salvage remnants of my shattered identity. I reached out to old friends, seeking solace in their understanding, and I even considered professional help to navigate the labyrinth of my emotions. The process was grueling, each session peeling back layers of regret and unspoken fears. I learned that betrayal is a multifaceted wound, It not only severs the ties of trust, but also fractures the very sense of self that defines us. In confronting my own shortcomings, I began the slow, painful journey toward acceptance. Though the road ahead was steep and uncertain, one particular evening, as winter crept in with its icy grip, I found myself wandering the quiet streets of our neighborhood. The frosty air bit at my skin, mirroring the chill that had settled within me. I recalled how Jenny and I had once walked these same streets hand in hand, our laughter mingling with the crisp air. Now, each step felt like a march toward an unknown future. A future where the warmth of her presence was replaced by a void that even the harshest cold could not fill. At I end that solitary walk, I came to understand that the pain I felt was not solely due to the betrayal, but also a mourning for the dreams we once shared. The life we had envisioned together, built on mutual promises and the comfort of routine, was now nothing more than a collection of memories that haunted me at every turn. The realization was both liberating and devastating. I could no longer cling to a past that had slipped irretrievably away. Yet, even as I grappled with this profound loss, a quiet determination began to emerge. I recognized that the path to healing would be arduous, marked by moments of despair and self-doubt. But I also knew that clinging to the bitterness of betrayal would only anchor me further in sorrow. The journey ahead would require rebuilding, brick by brick, the shattered fragments of my identity. A task that felt as daunting as it was necessary. In the depths of that long, dark winter, I resolved to seek not just revenge or retribution, but understanding and growth. I would confront the parts of myself that had failed to see the warning signs, learn from my mistakes, and ultimately, find a way to forgive. Not for Jenny or Johnson, but for myself. Only by embracing the full spectrum of my pain could I hope to move forward, to transform the agony of betrayal into a catalyst for change. Thus, as I stand at the crossroads of memory and possibility, I know that the descent into these shadows was not the end, but rather the beginning of a painful rebirth. The betrayal that tore our lives apart had also, in its cruel way, stripped away the illusions I had long harbored. Now, with every painful step, I am learning to navigate the darkness, holding on to the faint glimmer of hope that one day, I might emerge into a light that is entirely my own. In the aftermath of my soul-crushing introspection, a cold reality set in. The betrayal was not something I could ignore any longer. The winter had not only brought a chill to the air, but had also intensified the emotional frost that enveloped my heart. As days melted into one another with the bleak monotony of survival, I resolved to confront the forces that had shattered my once beloved world. I knew that the time for retreat had long passed. I needed to face the full extent of my pain, and in doing so, perhaps reclaim some semblance of control over my destiny. It began with a series of restless nights, each one haunted by vivid dreams of happier times and the slow disintegration of trust. I would awaken drenched in sweat, the echo of laughter now twisted into mocking memories of a past that had slipped irretrievably away. The ghosts of our shared history, those stolen moments, the promises we had whispered in the dark, now appeared as cruel specters that would not let me forget. I realized that if I were to move forward, I needed to confront not only Jenny but also the man I had once called my friend. Johnson. My first step was to seek closure, a task that demanded a confrontation with both of them. I reached out to a trusted mutual friend, someone who had been witness to our journey from its hopeful beginning to its tragic unraveling. In the quiet of a late afternoon, over coffee that tasted more bitter than sweet, I asked him to arrange a meeting. I wasn't sure what I hoped to achieve, perhaps an explanation, or maybe an acknowledgement of the irreversible damage that had been done. But I knew that the silence that had filled the gaps between our conversations was no longer an option. When the day of the meeting finally arrived, my emotions were a turbulent mix of anger, sorrow, and an almost desperate need for truth. I met Johnson first, in a modest cafe on the edge of town. His eyes, once so full of mirth and camaraderie, now seemed guarded, as if he too bore the weight of our shared secret. He greeted me with a nod that carried an air of resignation. We sat across from each other at a small table, the clamor of the cafe fading into a distant hum as the tension between us grew palpable. I began with questions. Direct, unflinching questions that demanded answers. "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling with the force of my pent-up anguish. How did we go from sharing dreams and confidences to betraying the very essence of our friendship? Johnson's silence was heavy before he spoke. He admitted that, for him, the lines between friendship and something more had blurred gradually, seduced by memories of our college days and the magnetic pull of Jenny's presence. He confessed that he had seen something in her. A spark, a promise of a life filled with excitement and passion, that he had believed was missing in her marriage. In his words, there was an air of regret, as if he too was condemned by the choices made. Yet even as he spoke, I couldn't help but feel that his confession was a paltry attempt at justifying an act that had left me emotionally bankrupt. The room seemed to shrink around us, every second stretching into an eternity of remorse and bitter understanding. The conversation left me with more questions than answers, and though I sought clarity, I found only the murkiness of shared guilt. Johnson's admission was not an apology. It was an explanation, cold and dispassionate, that did little to soothe the raw wound of betrayal. After our encounter, I turned my attention to Jenny. Our meeting was arranged in the quiet solitude of a park, a place that had once been our favorite sanctuary. Now it was a landscape of contrasts. A gentle spring breeze played with the fallen leaves, while the heaviness of our conversation threatened to engulf us both. Jenny arrived looking pale and distant, her eyes downcast as if she were bracing herself for a storm of retribution. I did not waste time with pleasantries. The gravity of the situation demanded a direct approach. "Jenny," I began, the single word laden with years of shared memories and the agony of recent betrayal. "Explain to me how we reached this point. Was our love ever real to you? Or was it merely a comfort until something, or someone, better came along?" Her silence was as crushing as the weight of 1,000 unspoken regrets. Finally, her voice emerged, soft and tremulous, as she recounted her feelings of emptiness, the gradual disillusionment with a life that had once seemed so secure. She spoke of yearning for something that transcended routine, a longing for passion and authenticity that she felt had been missing in our marriage. I listened, each word a reminder of promises unfulfilled, of dreams deferred and lost. Jenny's confession was not an act of vindication. It was an admission of a mistake that had grown beyond the bounds of a fleeting indiscretion. She explained how, over time, her connection with Johnson had deepened, nourished by years of shared history and unspoken understanding. And on that fateful night, when the house was cloaked in darkness and I was lost in the distractions of my own making, that connection had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. It was as if the universe had conspired to converge the seemingly disparate elements of our lives into a moment of catastrophic truth. As I listened, a cascade of emotions threatened to overwhelm me. Anger, sorrow, and a profound sense of loss mingled together into an inescapable grief. Yet, amid the tumult, there emerged a reluctant clarity. I recognized that the betrayal was not solely theirs. It was also a product of my own negligence, of my failure to nurture the very love that had once promised eternity. In the stark honesty of that park bench, I understood that our lives had diverged irreparably long before this meeting took place. The conversation ended not with the catharsis I had desperately sought, but with a quiet resignation. Jenny, eyes glistening with tears, murmured a whispered apology, a sound that carried the weight of a lifetime of regret. I realized then that our shared past had dissolved into something unrecognizable, leaving behind only shards of a love that was too fragile to withstand the pressures of time and unspoken desire. Walking away from that meeting, I felt a peculiar numbness. The act of confronting the truth had not brought the closure I had hoped for. Instead, it left me standing at the precipice of a new reality, one where the future was as uncertain as the fractured remnants of my heart. In the silence that followed, I vowed to rebuild my life, not to seek vengeance or to dwell in perpetual sorrow, but to forge a path towards self-forgiveness and eventual healing. As I left the park, the sun began to break through the cloudy sky, a tentative promise of a new day. Yet, the light felt different now, tinged with the bittersweet knowledge of what had been lost and what could never be reclaimed. The journey ahead was daunting, filled with the echoes of betrayal and the constant reminder of a love that had been irrevocably tainted. But in that moment of desolation, I resolved that the path to recovery lay not in forgetting, but in understanding. In the painful acknowledgement of our imperfections, I might one day find the strength to rebuild a life that was truly my own. In the weeks following the painful confrontations, I was forced to face the raw truth. My life was at a crossroads between clinging to a broken past and forging a new future. The betrayal had stripped away the illusions I once held, leaving behind a painful clarity. I realized that the neglect, my distraction in favor of fleeting comforts, had allowed this betrayal to take root. With the weight of regret heavy on my heart, I knew I had to reclaim what remained of my identity. One cold morning, as I walked through our old neighborhood, the sight of budding trees offered a quiet promise of renewal. I resolved to rebuild my life, not as a bitter echo of lost love, but as an opportunity for growth. I returned to the basketball court, this time not as an escape, but as a way to rediscover strength and self-worth. Each bounce of the ball became a step toward mending the fractured pieces of my soul. Slowly, I immersed myself in new challenges. I reconnected with old friends who reminded me that I was more than the sum of my heartaches. I began journaling, translating my pain into words that helped me understand and ultimately forgive. Not just Jenny and Johnson, but myself. Forgiveness became a beacon in the darkness, guiding me toward acceptance of the past and a more hopeful future. The path to healing was not linear. There were nights when memories surged like tidal waves, threatening to pull me back into despair. Yet, in those moments I found solace in the simple act of moving forward. Each day, I took deliberate steps toward a future that honored my newfound resilience. I enrolled in courses, traveled to unfamiliar places, and gradually rebuilt a life defined by self-awareness and compassion. As I learned to let go of the bitterness, I understood that the end of one chapter marked the beginning of another. I accepted that Jenny and I were on different paths, and that the betrayal, though painful, was a catalyst for profound transformation. With a cautious yet hopeful heart, I stepped into a future where I could love again. First and foremost, learning to love myself. Now, I stand at the threshold of a new beginning, scarred but wiser. The journey of betrayal and rebirth taught me that while the past shapes us, it does not have to confine us. Every scar is a reminder of the lessons learned. Every new day a chance to create a life that is entirely my own. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed this journey, please give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories like this one. Got thoughts or experiences you'd like to share? Drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.